First podcast, first time we hear from the Bills talking after the Stefon Diggs trade. I'm Kevin Carroll. Welcome to the Buffalo End Zone podcast. I was going to say first podcast since the Diggs trade where we heard from Bills players. First podcast for us since we had audio issues with Chris Trapasso from CBS. First podcast post John Scott. Andy Young stepping into the role now and will be joining me on the post-game podcast, the weekly podcast, as we keep you in the loop with all things Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, glad to be doing it. Of course, we wish our good buddy John Scott the best of luck in his new endeavors.
Yes.
Hey, but we're moving on without the man.
Yeah, no hard feelings towards John.
Yeah.
I got to be honest with you. Andy and I are really good friends with John, so he made a decision for his career and what he wanted to do. Andy and I are here. Andy technically has more experience covering the Bills than John anyways.
That's right.
Andy and I have been around each other for a long time at this point, so we'll bring you hopefully a good time with Bills information sprinkled in moving forward.
Yeah, I grew up in Western New York, a Bills fan, and then transitioned into the media, came back here to Buffalo, been here since 2011 and dabbled on and off with sports and news, and I've been at the Bills all the way through that time with John Scott, so pretty well-versed. You've been covering the Bills for like 20-some years, so I think we know what's going on.
Yeah, and what's going on, of course, is the draft now, Andy. This time next week, we're on day 2 of the draft, and we'll find out the big question on what the Bills are doing with their first-round pick, if they're trying to move up. If not, I mean, this all hinges around everything we're going to talk about today. We'll get deeper into draft talk next Wednesday as we inch closer to the draft. But all this kind of intertwined as the Bills had their first media availability, their first first day of off-season work was this week, where I think Sean McDermott said 95% of the players were there. And one issue we don't have to worry about is why Stefon Diggs isn't there, because we know why.
Yeah, we've been dealing with that for the last couple of seasons. Where is Stefon Diggs? When's he going to show up? Obviously now Stefon Diggs has been jettisoned, and it was our first time having a chance to talk with Josh Allen and Sean McDermott about their thoughts on the Stefon Diggs situation and what exactly unfolded there. Unfortunately, we didn't get a whole lot of clarity or new answers or revelations about the ins and outs and what happened to the apparent chasm or schism between Diggs and the organization. What did that have to do with Josh Allen's relationship with Diggs? What did that have to do with Sean McDermott's relationship with Diggs? They really took the high road. They both said, hey, we have a lot of gratitude for what Stefon Diggs did for us and for this organization over the last 4 seasons, really elevating the Bills into a playoff contender. Josh Allen, of course, elevating to one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Diggs was right there as one of the best receivers in the NFL throughout that time. McDermott, of course, saying that Diggs really helped elevate the organization and elevate them into what they've become today. So you didn't hear a whole lot about the inner workings of what went on behind the scenes there. Both guys really, taking the high road on what Diggs represented, and they wished him the best of luck. Allen said, actually, that after the trade went down, he texted back and forth with Diggs a little bit and just wished him well and gave his gratitude and thanks for helping him make him into the player he is today. And Josh has reiterated this time and time again throughout the years. He said, I love Steph like a brother, and I think he truly means that. And sometimes brothers have a parting of ways, and they don't get along. Doesn't mean they're enemies. Just it was time.
Yeah, and this will lead us to where the Bills are now against where they were when they got rid of their first-round pick for Diggs to bring Diggs in where Josh Allen was in his career. Now we're going to see, Andy, now the foot's to the fire or whatever that phrase is where, okay, we now have a bona fide QB star in Josh Allen. Stefon Diggs was here. He helped us get to this point. You hear this oftentimes with coaches. Like we brought this up with McDermott before. Is McDermott the coach that can just get you to the playoffs but not the next level? Stefon Diggs was here to help a young Josh Allen get confidence and become the quarterback that he should be in the NFL. Now it's going to be very interesting to see because some of and you were at the press conference. I've been on vacation, but I do pay attention, believe it or not.
You're always on vacation to a degree.
I am, absolutely. I've done enough. 22 years, Andy. But the big question is, do they need a superstar wide receiver, or are they at a place right now where they can go through a season with players that just have roles on the offense? And Josh, now it's up to you to use the ability to find that open guy where scheming open, and it's not always, here's your number one guy. We're at that point. I mean, again, I am all for them doing whatever they have to do to get up in the top 10 and maybe even top 5 to get.
We'll get there.
Together. But at any rate, a lot of talk yesterday with where Josh is now in his career as far as leadership goes, as far as how he execute on the field and stuff like that.
You know, it kind of goes back to the question that was posed on X or Twitter by Diggs the night before he was traded, when someone was talking about that very situation, saying, you know, maybe Allen can move on and survive and still be great without Stefon Diggs. And Diggs he replied to that and said, "You sure?"
Yes.
Well, we're about to find out, aren't we?
And that's when everyone went, that's just Steph being Steph. Pay no attention to that.
It's just being competitive. I think he knew something at that point.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see. That was a big topic of conversation at One Bills Drive on Thursday for the offseason workouts. Asked of Brandon Beane, asked of Sean McDermott, do you truly need, at this point, a number one bona fide wide receiver for Josh Allen to replace Stefon Diggs? Do you need that guy? Brandon Beane said, he joked, hey, you'd like to have two of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he also, in the same breath, in the same sentence, said, you know what? We need guys who can fit a role. You don't necessarily have to have one singular superstar wide receiver when you have a Josh Allen at the point in his career where maybe he can elevate a group of players around him. Everybody wants to talk about the Patrick Mahomes example. They traded away Tyreek Hill. He elevated that group of guys. Granted, Hall of Fame, maybe the greatest tight end of all time, in Travis Kelce, who's their de facto number one receiver. But he did a good job this past season, especially and over the last couple of years since Hill left, of elevating other guys, of not necessarily needing that number one Tyreek Hill, Stefon Diggs, Jamar Chase, alpha dog. Spread it around. Use your tight end. And I think that's partly what the Bills envision as well. Sean McDermott said, and I think this is a great point, that it's still, as him as a defensive coordinator and head coach, it's a matchup league. So when you have a number one guy who can do it all, who's a matchup issue, that's really tough on the opposing defense. And it always gives you that security blanket, that person that you know you can go to. At the same time, he said there is power in spreading around the football and that defenses don't know where you're going to go with the ball. And if you have a whole host of capable playmakers in different roles, maybe you've got a speed guy down the field, maybe you've got an underneath guy, you've got somebody in the intermediate, you've got Dalton Kincaid as a tight end, maybe you can survive that way. And if the Bills go more towards what they were doing towards the tail end of last season when they went on that winning streak, that's kind of what you saw, is they looked Diggs' way a little bit less.
Right.
Ran the ball more with James Cook, got the ball to Kincaid and Shakir quite often, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that's the answer. They bring in Curtis Samuel. They still need that downfield threat, though. I still think they don't have that at this point, but maybe that's not your number one. That's a specialized guy that they draft later down the line.
Right. Slippery slope here for me on not getting into too much draft talk while we're talking about the wide receiver position. But you brought up Patrick Mahomes. There's like examples of this. I mean, Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay, there were some years where he just had one receiver whose name you knew and other guys.
Like a Jordy Nelson or
right.
a Randall Cobb. Right.
And the other guys you started
Devontae
to
Adams.
learn their names
Right.
as the season. You know, of course, Tom Brady did it in New England. Half the time they didn't have big name. Randy Moss might be the only big-name wide receiver they ever had. So it's doable. It's just, I think with Josh Allen, there's that added wrinkle that's more like Mahomes on what he can do with the ball himself as well.
Right.
Where it's not just, okay, we have a guy who can distribute the football all over the football field, which Josh Allen can do. but he can also take off and run. So there's that added element there. So it'll be interesting to see what ends up ultimately happening because you're right. You have Dalton Kincaid, you have Dawson Knox, you have Shakir, you have Curtis Samuel. Who
Mac
else?
Hollins,
Right.
Justin Shorter, Andy Isabella, some of these guys on the fringe of the roster.
Right.
It's a lot of targets to go around, though, especially when you say goodbye to Diggs, and he gets 150, 160 targets, and Gabe Davis, who got like 80 targets. Say what you want about Davis. He was on the field almost every single snap. That you're over 200, 250 targets. It's got to go to somebody, right? So I don't think that those guys all just absorb that. They've got to bring in a couple of wide receivers, whether that's through the draft, whether that's post June 1st in free agency, that sort of thing. They're going to do that. Whether they're able to land a true number one, whether they view in the draft any of those guys outside the top 10, right? Outside of Odunze, outside of Malik Neighbors, outside of Marvin Harrison Jr., do they view any of those guys as a number one receiver down the line? Maybe they're not right away, but can develop into that.
Right.
We'll see if they actually need that, and we'll see if Josh is indeed that player that elevates everybody else around him.
Do you think that they think, honestly, when I first heard it, I kind of rolled my eyes a little bit. Like, what are these guys talking about? You have to address this. You can't go in with Josh Allen without at least one top-tier target with the other cast of characters that are there that are mainly unproven. Do you think that they honestly believe that, or is this just the draft is coming up, call it a smokescreen, call it coach talk, call it whatever you want, that they're just putting that out there so that, like, no one's going to know we are going to make a trade up into the top 10 to try and get one of these
I think
guys.
it's more of this. If he goes out there and says, oh, my gosh, we need a number one receiver, we've got to come away with somebody. A, that's leverage in the draft, and other teams know that. B, if they're not able to get one of those top guys, say they don't view somebody that slips to 28, or they're not able to trade into the top 20 or even the top 10 to get some of the top guys. If he went out there and said, boy, we really need a wide receiver this week, and then come Thursday, Friday, Saturday, we're at the end of the draft, and they just, for whatever reason, whether it was their board, whether it was trades, whatever, weren't able to acquire somebody that fits that bill, boy, that looks bad. So he's not going to go out there and say it, that they need a wide receiver. We all know they do. The NFL knows they do. But he's got to peel that back a little bit just in case it doesn't work out the way they intend it to.
Wouldn't it be fun if Bean just came out and went, whew, we got to do something here, fellas.
Right.
We gotta replace Stefon Diggs.
Right.
It would be but I know what you're talking about. It's just when I think of the team as is structured right now, there's a player missing on offense that catches balls.
Correct.
There's obviously someone who will end up arriving in some capacity. But at the same time, I do think Josh Allen is at that point in his career where you could, in a pinch, if things didn't go your way, say what everyone says, as long as the Bills have Josh Allen right now, they're in contention. That might end up playing out. I still don't think it will, but that might be how it plays out. And then it will be interesting to see how the season plays out, to see if he's on par, if he's on that level of a quarterback in the NFL that can just take over, because it looked like it at the end of last season when they weren't getting Diggs the ball that much.
I mean, the dude rushed for 15 touchdowns last season. He had the most touchdowns in the NFL, and that's with Diggs giving next to nothing outside of double teams and things like that, taking attention away over the last, 10 weeks or more. So I think Allen is certainly capable of putting a team on his back. Whether that is the best way to still win, we say that all we want. They still haven't gotten over the hump. They've lost in the divisional round 3 straight years.
Right.
They haven't gotten past Kansas City. They haven't gotten to a Super Bowl. They've only been to the AFC Championship once, and that was 3 years ago.
That was Diggs' first year, wasn't it?
That was Diggs' second year.
Second year.
2021. No, it was the first year. You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's interesting to see, but you got to think, and I think everybody around the league thinks and knows. That's why you see all the mock drafts say that the Bills are probably going to take a wide receiver. Whether that's in the first round, second round, they trade up, they trade back and take somebody. But for this example, let's say they don't like any of the wide receivers in the first round after in that 28 zone.
Yeah.
Maybe they trade back and they take somebody who's maybe not going to be number one right away, but could develop into one. So in the interim, does Josh have enough to keep him competitive, keep the team competitive, and stay that way while they develop a guy who becomes a Stefon Diggs, who was a fifth-round pick, mind you?
Right. It would be a tough pill to swallow for Bills fans, though, with where Josh is in his career. You talk about your Super Bowl window. This will be interesting, where they fall in the playoffs every year. We had that taste of the AFC Championship right away, and it was, okay, so the Super Bowl is logically the next stop that the Bills are going on, and then that just didn't turn out to be the case, and ugly exits from the postseason to, I talked with Chris Trapasso about this a few weeks ago, that I think now's the time, if you're going to ever at any point make a move to go all in on Josh Allen, when you have someone like Marvin Harrison Jr. out there, it to me, and I'm no GM of an NFL team.
Oh, no?
Not even close.
You're not even the GM of your own house.
No, that's true.
Hi, Claire.
Yeah, hi, Claire. Go all in, Andy. I'm a go all in guy right now.
I see that, and it's fun, and I just did a mock draft this week on SpectrumLocalNews.com where I actually mocked the Bills into trading up to the top 10 to number 9 with Chicago and taking Rome Odunze out of Washington as that guy. The cost is prohibitive. Yes, you're probably going to have to give up next year's first. If you look back at 2017 when the Bills traded out of number 10 with Kansas City, when Kansas City, of course, took Mahomes, the Chiefs gave up next year's first, right, and a third. Bills don't have a third this year. It cost a little more to get up to 9, and it also depends on whether those receivers would even be there at 9.
Right.
If you're talking about getting up into like 5, 4, 5, 6,
yeah,
dude, you're giving up. You're giving up a lot. You're giving up. You're probably giving up this year's first and second, next year's first and second, and maybe some more to do that. And maybe you get a 5th or a 6th round pick back.
Yep.
To kind of even things out. That's a whole lot for a guy who's not a quarterback.
I get it.
That's a whole lot. Like, you're basically saying that I'm going to trade this guy I'm drafting, call it Marvin Harrison Jr. at number 5.
Let's do it. Yep.
You're saying that Marvin Harrison Jr. is worth 4 starters, first and second round guys who are almost always starters, unless you're, a bust. Do you see that?
I mean, that's the worry right there. But if this happens, Marvin Harrison Jr., the pedigree alone lets you know that he's got talent. And then what he's done and what he's projected to do at the next level and how he's projected to be. My selling point would be this guy's going to come in here. Who cares? And we're going to be good, compete for the Super Bowl for the next 5 years or so. Automatic. So who cares about next year's draft? If this guy comes in and does what, and is that one piece that this team needs to get to the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl, now's as good a time as any and not reach for it later on down the road, to me.
Our old buddy who we talked about at the open of this show was at the press conference yesterday as well. He asked Brandon Beane, how do you feel about giving up next year's first?
Okay.
Beane gave a pretty cool answer. He said, I'm always willing to talk. and I'll always think about everything. But I don't love the idea of it. And this could be all smoke, and this is all posturing. He's never going to tell you exactly what he's going to do. Mm-hmm. So you have to kind of read the tea leaves. He mentioned back when he was with Carolina as an assistant in the front office that every time they did that and traded up and gave up that next year's pick, they ended up that next year most often feeling regretful that they did it.
Oh.
That the guy they got maybe was somewhat disappointing in what they needed if you're going to give up multiple first-round picks for a guy. And that the guy that next year that they thought, oh, man, we could have been picking 17th, and we could have got this guy who was a better wide receiver than the guy we moved up to take at 5. Right. That's the cost analysis. That's the risk-reward analysis that you have to make in that role. The Bills, while this wasn't anyone on staff's doing at the time, remember we were all for in 2014 the Bills trading up for Sammy Watkins.
Right. Yes.
They gave up the following year's first, and guess what? Who was the one who ended up trading Sammy Watkins after his career didn't quite work out the way everyone would hope from a number 4 overall pick? That was Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott in Beane's first summer. When Beane had just started and they kind of cleaned house a little bit.
Oh, no, I remember that.
Right. So, and you and I both were like, yeah, trade for Sammy Watkins, right? That's a case of it not working out. Now, like Atlanta, they made a huge move up to get Julio Jones. That guy's a Hall of Famer. He helped him go to a Super Bowl that they should have won against the Patriots.
Yes.
He was an amazing player. It's just that it's that cost-benefit analysis that you make in that job.
Yeah. I mean, I'll leave that up to the guys who get paid way more money than me, but I'll have my opinion.
You're doing pretty well for yourself.
Yeah, get that big money after 22 years.
That's when you get your raise.
Yeah. But it should be interesting how this plays out leading up to the – like I said, I'm just the guy that looking at what the Bills have right now, I want all in for this team. And again, you're from here. I was not from here, but like the Bills when I grew up in Boston because the Patriots were horrible when I grew up. Mm-hmm. Bills were a fun team to watch. But I don't have that link that you have being born out here of what it would mean to win a Super Bowl finally out here. I just think you're there right now. You're almost at the point. You just need something. And again,
here's my argument. I'm playing devil's advocate. They just got through a 2-3 year stretch where they went all in.
Yeah.
It didn't work out. They've been trading up for draft picks. They traded up for Kyer Elam. They traded up for Dalton Kincaid. They signed Von Miller. They pushed all the chips to the table, and they still didn't get through. Now they're at a point where Josh Allen's contract cap hit sky high this year, even higher next year and beyond.
Yeah.
They need to get cheaper and younger. You go through and blow out all your draft picks on one guy, that's cost control that you're giving up in first and second round players who are going to be starters. As Josh Allen was asked this, do you feel like you're in the second stage of your career? Right?
Okay.
So this is going into year 7. Unbelievable, right? That this is his 7th season in the league.
Right.
They've been through this first part. Now this feels like kind of a reset of the roster around his contract. It's time for them to get younger, faster, and more explosive at some positions,
right,
and cheaper because you're going to have more guys that come up for contracts. They just had to jettison all these guys. Poyer.
Now, was Allen asked about the team getting younger and what his thoughts were?
He was, and he said specifically, I don't think getting younger and cheaper is a bad thing.
Okay.
He knows it, right? Josh is sharp. He'll say, I don't get paid to make those decisions and blah, blah, blah. He knows about what his contract means,
right,
and what it means to have people around him. So in one regard, yeah, trading up for a wide receiver is great because you fill that role with a guy who's going to be here for at least 5 years on a relatively cheap deal, but then at the cost of giving up 3 or 4 other guys who could be relatively cheap on deals and maybe be just as good. You don't know. That's the crapshoot of the draft.
Yeah.
If you knew, all right, Marvin Harrison right now is going to be a 10-time Pro Bowler and help the Bills to the Super Bowl, well, you sign up all day, of course, but
Right.
you don't know that. You go to the people, the analytics folks that a lot of times will say trading up is just not good business unless it's for a quarterback because you're lessening your odds of hitting. Even the best GMs, it's a crapshoot for these guys.
Yeah.
That's my stance on it. I wouldn't trade all the way up into 5 or 6 and mortgage next year and everything. It's fun to think about.
I'll give my final opinion next Wednesday. I mean,
This is an awesome conversation.
I've
too.
been team
It's fascinating.
all in this whole time. Just no one has yet to convince me otherwise, but you just planted some questions in my head that I'll think about.
Wow.
And we'll address that more.
John Scott never made you think about anything.
John Scott scared the crap out of me.
He is tough. He has big muscles.
So we'll get into that more, but always around this time of year, Andy, with the draft, and you filled in on the podcast before, we kind of do some off-topic stuff.
This is a real wild card because I have no idea what you're going to ask me.
Well, first I'm going to get into Josh Allen talking about getting to golf with Tiger Woods.
That was
which
cool.
was cool
Yeah.
and cool to hear, and it made me think of the last day of the Masters, that amateur from Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
Can't remember his name. But golfing with Tiger Woods and playing better than Tiger Woods
Yeah.
for a span. I'm sitting there talking to my wife. I'd be talking so much trash. When would you ever get a chance to turn to Tiger Woods and say, I just beat you on that hole?
You would not be talking smack to Tiger Woods.
But then Josh Allen saying yesterday how nervous he was. Here's a guy who's played in the AFC Championship.
Yeah.
And we've all been there. If you go to tee off at a golf course and there's a bunch of people watching, you're putting that ball on the tee with a little shake in your hand trying to get it there before you tee off and whack. So maybe I would be a little too nervous to talk trash to Tiger Woods, but
You might have a couple adult beverages to smooth it out a little bit. Yeah, Josh, he said that was an awesome experience and that, stepping up with Tiger, he felt the nerves, right? And he's golfed in big events before, too. He was in the match with Brady and Rodgers and Mahomes. He's played in the Pebble Beach Pro-Am. All those sorts of things. And, of course, he's on TV all the time.
right.
With millions of people watching him on television and thousands in a stadium, and you're still nervous because he said, don't meet your heroes, right?
Right.
but he said Tiger was awesome and gave him some advice and some things that they talked about that he'll keep with him as far as a competitive athlete too. So that's really, really cool. I mean, go golf with Tiger Woods. That'd be on a lot of people's bucket list. If you could do one thing, play around a golf with Tiger Woods.
Yeah, I agree with that. So this is the time of year, and I only watch this every year around this time, the movie Draft Day. I think I've asked John. John's not a fan of it. I'm outside of any other time of year. I don't really like the movie, but it gets you in the draft mood. And I think Alan even referenced
He
the
did.
movie.
He was talking about Kevin Costner and making the pick.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. And it's funny because Josh said that when he was asked a couple of different ways about what sort of input he has on the draft,
Yeah.
and he joked that last year he just sent a text message to Brandon Beane during the draft that just said Dalton Kincaid.
Is it true?
That's true. And according to Josh,
Yeah.
and he drafted Dalton Kincaid. So he joked about Kevin Costner going up and making the pick in that movie. I got to be honest with you, I have never watched that movie in full.
Really?
I've only caught clips of it. I don't watch a ton of movies anymore.
I mean, it'll be on demand. It'll be run somewhere, NFL Network or something.
Right.
At some point. Like I said,
Spectrum on demand.
yeah, Spectrum on demand. Check it out. Those movies are free, right?
Yeah.
But again, it's just like a tradition. I just, when it was available, just kind of started. Don't like it, don't hate it, can sit through it. Kevin Costner's always good
Yeah.
in anything he does. Dennis Leary is the head coach. kind of a miss for me, but I get it. Final thing, Andy. Sabres, obviously, with a shakeup. Who was that? When I was out golfing with John the other day, I called the head coach Tim Murray being fired. Like, I've been covering them for so long. I've been covering the team for so long. I tried to explain. Since I've been out here, aside from Lindy Ruff when I first moved out here, it seems like the Sabres are just firing a head coach and hiring a new head coach every 3 years or so.
Or less.
So the names all blend together for me. Dan Bilesma, Tim Murray,
Phil Housley,
Ron
Ralston.
Can't forget about Ron Ralston in the Garden Club.
Jason Bottrell, Pat LaFontaine.
Do you think it's a good decision to move on from Granato at this point?
You know, the coach ultimately, somebody had to fall on the sword here. You can't just jettison every player, right? The players have a lot of blame here. For whatever reason, whatever Granato's message was, just wasn't getting through. And you heard from the Sabres in their postseason locker room exit interviews as they cleaned out their lockers, they need and want more accountability. That tells me maybe it wasn't coming from Granato, or he was trying and the message just wasn't being heard. So I think, unfortunately, in a league where I believe he was the 6th longest tenured coach in the NHL at 3 seasons, 3.5 seasons, whatever it was, they fire coaches mid-season all the time, and it often provides a spark. It's the nature of the sport. It was time. Kevin Adams now has a lot of work ahead of him because now he's fired that coach who he wanted. He's got to do something to reshape this roster. It's on him to get the coaching hire right, and it's on him to bring in the right pieces because in 2 years, 3 years, he's the next guy to go, probably with the head coach,
right?
If this playoff drought continues. Right move, though. It had to be done.
So I would say that he was that kind of coach that we had talked about earlier. He was good with these young guys to get them to gel and become a decent team and put together some stuff.
And his roots are in development, so that makes sense.
It just seemed like the development stage of what the Sabres currently are right now should be done. And it should be more of a focus on just playing to win and not developing younger guys.
Deline said they need to practice harder. They need to focus more. That practice is very important. I think training camp, we've heard a little bit from other reporters, folks in the know, that maybe training camp was a little loose and maybe a little too focused on the prospects.
You have what Casey Middlestat said when he joined the Avalanche. It's like, I haven't sweated this much during a practice in my entire life after his first practice in Colorado.
There you go. So
and that tells you right there.
Yep, I agree. Donnie was a good coach, personable for reporters to talk to, but it ran its course.
Yeah, I agree. Finally, we always talk about shows we're watching or binge watching or anything that's out there. I got nothing.
I've been watching, I got into this, 3 Body Problem on Netflix.
So I started watching that and would lose focus.
It's slow
during
developing.
Every episode on what the heck's going on.
Did you get to what the crux is? Like 4 or 5 episodes in?
No.
Okay.
I stopped watching it.
Right.
I know the description was something about aliens or something like that.
Yeah, so in essence, basically in China, a scientist ended up making contact with aliens many years ago in the 60s or 70s during the Chinese Revolution.
Yeah.
And it took that long for them to get back to them. And then the aliens had sent cell phones to us and had been spying on us to see what kind of civilization we were. And basically said that you're bugs. They sent a message that said you're bugs and you're liars and you're deceitful. And they're on the way to destroy you.
Oh.
Yeah. So it gets somewhere. It's pretty cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll revisit it, Andy.
Yeah. That's the one I've been in.
The one I've been watching is called Louder Milk.
Mm-hmm.
It has, and John and I talked about this on his last, because he did not know in The Office the main character got hypnotized, and that's why he didn't care about work anymore. John just thought he didn't care about work anymore. But at any rate, it has that guy in it. It's about being sober, basically.
Okay.
It's about, but it's by the Farrelly brothers, so there's a lot of inappropriate comedy in it. So it's about getting sober. It's about going to AA and stuff like that. The main character leads a group for AA, and the comedy lies within people falling off the wagon a bit here and there and stuff like that. It's pretty good. But again, I find myself, again, with that, 5 episodes in, love watching it, just forget about it.
Yeah. I'm that way with a lot of shows, or, even I'll start. It's very rare that you go on Netflix or HBO Max or any of these services, for me at least, and just like binge watch an entire show. Like you'll try it, you'll get into it, and then something comes up or you get bored with it and you just move on to something else. That's kind of my life.
Yeah.
I'm not real focused when it comes to TV shows. Now, there are ones where I'll watch them 1,000 times, and that's its own issue. Like
Seinfeld.
I've watched every Seinfeld 1,000 times, every Sopranos episode 1,000 times. I'll go back and watch movies I love. But new shows, it takes a lot for me to get really into it.
Yeah, I agree with you. Well, the new show will be the new draft, Andy, coming up in less than a week.
With the new guy.
With the new guy. Everything's new. It's spring. It's a fresh start.
And
Andy.
we're all wearing dark gray.
We're in gray because it's a gloomy day. But we'll be back. We'll have our pre-draft podcast coming up next Wednesday.
Yep. And then Friday we'll do a mini podcast talking about the first round pick, presuming they have one.
Yeah, they better. Or we could just sit here and talk about Netflix for a good half hour if they trade out of the first round.
Will they pay me to do that?
Sure.
Probably.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe.
Sure they will. All right, so we'll be back here next Wednesday. As always, everyone, thanks for tuning in.